Hi, this is Praios and I'm a professional gambler. Today we will talk about the topic how to crush 6 different player types. We will have some help from Pokercode and Fedor Holz. So this will be a video I'm playing. But before that, I will give you my thoughts. So in my opinion, there are a few different player types. Not 6, but maybe only 5. Let's see. I have loose aggressive, tight aggressive. Tight aggressive is usually considered to be the best playing style, but loose aggressive is just someone who plays like a tag but adds a few more hands. This can also be okay-ish, but in a GTO game, obviously tag is the best style. Then I have loose passive. These are the usual fish with like 60 VPIP and not much aggression. These are the guys you love to play. And you could have a fish that is loose aggressive, but not like a lag, who can also be a winning player. He's just way too loose, playing like 50, 60% of hands, and does this aggressively. And then the only other type I would mention is a rock. That is a guy who is very, very tight and only gets involved with the best hands, and often also plays them relatively passive. We could also introduce some more categories like fish, for example, but you don't know if he is loose aggressive or loose passive in this way. Usually they are loose passive, I would say. Then you could also have a whale that is a premium fish, someone who is playing even worse than the standard fish. And a maniac. This is a guy who is overly aggressive and tries to win every pot very hard with raising, re-raising, and putting a lot of pressure on. Yeah, let's see what categories Fedor Holz uses. And by the way, in order to capitalize best on the tactics explained here, I would also recommend to get Holdem Manager, as this program makes it possible, or you can also go to Pokertracker. I have linked them below. Because this will give you detailed stats about your opponents. Obviously, don't use it on sites where it's not allowed. And this will give you way better reads when you have yourself, and it's not that expensive. And if you play poker regularly, this brings your game to the next level. And obviously, it couldn't hurt to have a PLO Trainer or PLO Vision as well. These are solvers to learn how GTO should be played, and this gives you a good baseline on how to play guys you don't know or other good players. And in addition to that, I also have like coaching sites linked below. Yeah, check it out if you feel the need to go to one of them. PLO Mastermind is from Jay Nendes, and Raise It Once. I don't know how it's called actually, although I have it in the description. It's the site from Full Garfund. But without further ado, let's now get into the video and see how Fedor Holz puts the players in categories.
How do I categorize players and make sure that I win the most money against them? I'll share that with you today. I generally split players within 6 types of categories. Online, I have a color coding system where over the years I have gained a lot of experience against all the different types of players, and that applies towards live poker as well. So the way I do it is I have some general categories that I move players into, and then I have some subcategories, and there's mixtures of those categories because not every player is obviously the same, but in my mind...
And the thing also is, people can move categories based on their mood. So if someone is like very chilled, he might be a tech and a good player, but maybe he has a bit of a temper and he gets very aggressive and basically going mad when he loses a few pots, and then he all of a sudden is a maniac and not a winning player anymore. So keep that in mind.
I want to have a clear idea of what player I think I'm playing against categorically, and do that as fast as possible based on the showdowns I see and the hands I see them play. What are those categories? Let's start right away. Category number 1 is the easiest one, the Nit. A rock, how it's sometimes called as well, is just a player.
Okay, a Nit. He calls a rock a Nit. I also had this category, but I think some tags can be Nits, but not a rock. So I don't, yeah, the Nit could be a completely different category. Like a tag, for me, it's a tag that is just a bit more cautious and can get and folds more hands under pressure, maybe. And maybe he's also on the tighter side, but not as tight as a rock. That would be my definition of a Nit.
That is too tight. They open too tight, they defend too tight, they 3-bet too tight, they're too passive post-flop, they mostly just put in chips with strong hands. There is obviously kind of a line of how tight they are and whether they never bluff or never put you in tough spots, and that's kind of a line. They can be super tight or just slightly too tight, but in my mind this is like a red color and a deep red color. It's just players like a signal like, hey, when this...
I think a lot of people are playing in the games of this guy because he's a tournament player. Yeah, basically at least. I think he's not a big cash game player. Also not sure if we should listen to his advice because he made this video last year where he said that he lost 1 million. I mean, honestly, I think he's a good player, but you see, even to good players, this can happen. And yeah, that's because he's playing like all the tournaments, also the very big ones. And yeah, this can get very expensive, obviously, when you have buy-ins of like 100K or even more.
This guy's raising you, when this guy's putting in big bets, they just do have too many strong hands, and it's very, very important. There's 2 ways to immediately...
I also think in general, it's quite, it's a no-brainer basically to play against most player types. You just have to exploit their tendencies. For example, if someone is loose passive, he's calling too much, does not make any action unless he has something, usually. So if he starts betting, get very cautious, only proceed if you have a very good hand. And value town this guy if he remains passive very lightly, because he will chase all sort of things. So it's quite a no-brainer and straightforward how to play against these guys.
You win money against,
or against these, in general, just exploit their tendencies. Where they do something wrong, exploit it.
This type of player. The first one is play lots of small pots against them. Because what is their main mistake? Where do they mostly lose money? They mostly lose money to not play enough pots and defend enough with medium strong hands. So you want to be in as many pots as possible, especially late position, like small blind against big blind or...
Not sure if it's explaining this correctly. I would say this guy, the Nit in his category, usually is not defending enough, so you want to steal his blinds a ton. So that's the thing. But if he shows aggression, for example, on UTG and getting into the pot, you have to be cautious and have to even fold more hands than usually. Thanks for the follow.
Button against big blind. So when they're in the big blind, this is a great spot to be open raising wide. They don't defend enough, they don't play back enough. So that's the first thing you want to be in.
Yeah, so a lot of money can be made pre-flop against them, but once they enter a pot, it can be hard against guys who only enter with the very premium hands. Yeah, he's talking about player types, and currently he's talking about rocks.
A lot of small
and how to exploit them.
Small pots against them and bluff a lot with small sizes. Just try to win all those little ones. They add up to a lot of value. And the second thing, which is more a passive line, is whenever they play back, you have to make tight folds. So that is really important, is when they check raise the flop, you can overfold. When they bet large on the flop or on the turn or on the river, that's mostly when they just have strong hands and you have to make those folds against them. So those are the 2 ways that against a Nit you will win a lot of money, and I think the most discipline is required to make those tight folds against them. You have
good recommendations.
Top pair weak kicker on a turn against a huge bet from them, just muck it. Something that separates really great players from mediocre players, to be able to make those fold against players that are nitty. Let's get directly to player 2, which is not really the opposite, but kind of the second weak-ish player style that you will see a lot, which is the calling station. Very important second type. Calling stations in general, obviously, as the name already says, they put in too many chips with too weak holdings. They like to see flops. These are things that you will hear them say. They They love to be in the pot, they love to call draws, they don't like folding pairs, and they like to look you up on the river. What is their general mistake? Their general mistake is they put in too many chips with too speculative holdings, too medium strong. Or
Yeah, so we have to value bet thinly against these guys. And we can also, yeah, we don't want to give them free cards, obviously, because they chase draws too light.
Like weak-ish hands that, especially when you have a strong range, that they should just be folding. So what do we do against this particular type of player? This is also a type of recreational player that will face oftentimes, especially in live poker. People get impatient, they become calling stations, they just want to be in the action.
Yeah, true. I think this is not a type you face that often in cash games online. But yeah, in live environments, these are the typical players like calling station. They probably some of them at least saw a pre-flop shot, but life is boring, so they still play enough. There's way too many hands, but not that much. But yeah, on the flop, they can't get away from their hands. So if they have like top pair, they are like, ah shit, I can't fold, I have top pair. I mean, we are talking about no limit Holdem at the moment and not PLO, obviously.
They want to see some, they don't want to be folding again. So oftentimes people turn into calling stations temporarily. So that's something that you need to be really aware of when people
Yeah, good joke, Robbie.
just don't want to fold when they become sticky. And what do we do against them to exploit the most? Very clearly, we want to have value. And the biggest thing is not only that we want to have value hands, because that's something we only can wait for, is we want to go thinner for value. So a hand that you may
thinner for value and bluff them less, because they love to call.
maybe wouldn't be betting against a very good opponent, against them when you know, okay, they're going to call third pair, they're going to call second pair. You can go wider for value and maybe bet a top pair that you wouldn't bet in other circumstances. So what I do against calling station is I want to go thin for value. So I want to put them in tough spots where I'm pretty sure they will call too many hands and just widen my value range. So that's the #1 exploit against calling station. So I reduce my bluffing range and then I widen my value range off the top, 3-bet them more with like hands like king jack suited, king queen suited, ace 10.
Yeah, good advice so far.
And suited. Hands like this where you maybe would flat against someone who's tighter, but against them, they're going to call a lot of worse hands. They're going to call queen 10 off or jack 10 off, and then they're going to call you down post flop. So that's something you want to widen your value range. You want to go thin for value, and you want to put in big bets against them. And how do you recognize it? I think this is the easiest type to recognize, especially they're going to be in a lot of pots. They're going to showdown hands that you will be like, oh, this hand, you know.
It looks like in his definition, this is a calling station, but in my definition, it's like loose passive. But yeah, it's basically a synonym.
You will also feel it from an ego perspective. They will find reasons for themselves to be in there and to call you down and want to be a hero. So I think you will figure that out pretty quickly. Let's get to the third player, which is, I would say, a pretty generic player. And I call it the solid regular or just a solid player. Generally, that doesn't necessarily mean
Yeah, that's a tag in my definition, tight aggressive.
they're great players. It just means that there's not this very typical thing where, no, okay, like that's their biggest mistake or like they're really bad there. They're generally people.
Yeah, usually these guys are quite balanced. They looked in some GTO ranges. They have a good general understanding of the game, and it will be hard to crush them. I mean, they still sometimes have like some bad leagues, especially on later streets, where it's very hard to be balanced all the time and call enough or fold enough. It depends on the player, but yeah, these in general are the guys you don't want to target that hard, and you have to assume that they play quite well, and GTO might be the play style unless you recognize a certain league in their game to approach these type.
Who have spent maybe more time playing poker and they try to not make mistakes or play a better style. But nevertheless, I call it population mistakes that they're very likely to be doing because they're kind of the mass player. They play like a lot of other players. They're not particularly doing something out of the box, but that means that they make the mistakes that most players make. And it's kind of the meta game right now as like, what is the mistake that most players make? And there's a few of them. And this is the most interesting one, but also the most difficult one to explain. There's a lot of small to medium mistakes mistakes that this type of player make that generally means that I try to explain it with like intuitive plays. When there's a line they take that is not necessarily intuitive to take, like with value or as a bluff, I generally think that they mostly just have the thing where it's intuitive. Yeah, so if they take a line where it's a big bet, a big bet, a big bet, that's just not really intuitive to take as a bluff. You would need to be really studied and really understand that that's something you do with a bluff. They just always have value. Or they check raise the river.
I think that's not true for the general good regular. The guys nowadays got quite good and should be balanced. And it should not be that easy to figure out what they have based on their line. And they should have value and bluffs in a good proportion. I mean, probably not perfectly balanced, but yeah, still okay-ish. At least that's my experience. But I also don't play that many tournaments. I play cash game usually.
It's not very intuitive to do this with the bluff. They always have value. So there's a lot of...
And the thing only is some more nitty of the regs sometimes shy away from these very big bluffs and stuff. But yeah, that's about it, I would say.
Spots like this where a solid player, I think, will play very predictable. Decent, not gonna make crazy mistakes, but the thing I always try to think about is they play like the mass would play. They try to avoid mistakes, and they generally have these very typical intuitive lines they take that you will see very often repeating. So that's my take on this player. That's also why, for me, this has always been yellow. It's just someone where they play like most other players do, and that's also the color the most players have for me in my mind. Especially if you play a 5k EPT main, a lot of players just try to play solid. That's like, I would say, the most generic type of player. Now let's get into the more fun side of poker, which is putting in a lot of chips crazily. We start with the number 4, which is the loose aggressive player. This is also more of a category I put players in because it's kind of a way of thinking. This type of player believes that in poker, you win by winning pots. That is a very particular way of thinking. Is like they try to fight for...
I think against certain player types, this can work quite greatly. And all these guys, if they are good legs, they also understand well how to use their image and get paid off way more often. And there might be people out there that are profitable playing this style. Especially live, there are definitely people out there playing it because the idiots or the recreational players will over-adjust against these guys and just always call them down and make huge mistakes. And I think it's even more profitable than tech style on so tight aggressive on most live casino tables. Online, I think it's not that profitable. And you also, I mean, I would differentiate between loose aggressive and loose aggressive, because then they don't go overboard with their pre-flop hands, and they just have like, what are you supposed to play? Like, whatever, 25% VPIP as example. I think it's about the number you are about to play. If he just goes up to 30% or maybe even 35%, it could still be okay and he could make it work for him. But if he has 50 VPIP, nobody can make it work if he plays decent players.
Lots and lots of pots. They're always more on the looser or aggressive side. In my mind, this is a pink player. Like, it's also a signal. They're always gonna find these creative lines. They're going to contest small pots. They maybe open raise a little wider. They maybe 3-bet a little wider. Doesn't necessarily mean that they play bad or poorly. Those are actually generally, I think, the toughest opponents to play against. They're gonna put you constantly in spots, and you really need...
Yeah, they put you in very tough decisions all the time, and I mean, if they do it well. I mean, some are just idiots, obviously.
To be on the lookout to make sure that you don't fall into an autopilot and be exploited by them. I would say for a long time, I count myself to this category as well. And it's more my mindset as well to look for pots to be won and where people can be exploited. So a very tricky type of player, very difficult to play against. And there's a big scale of how well you can do it and how poorly.
I think this is probably a misjudgment on his side. I didn't play with him much, but watched some of his streams and stuff. He is a standard tech, I would say, not a loose aggressive guy.
you can do it. There's some people who play really, really nice loose aggressive styles. I think a lot of the Brazilians do that really, really well. Like they're constantly on that edge of putting you in tough.
So he's talking about a good leg at the moment. Maybe there's a Maniac coming too. Let's see what his last category will be.
Spots, finding nice check raises or raises in position or small 3-bet spots pre-flop. They're very perfectionated how to especially play loose aggressive against these more solid type of players where then they maybe don't even understand that they're being exploited or that they make a mistake. So I think this type of player is a very particular one. What are the ways to win against those? I think against loose aggressive players, generally what works very well is to not try to go into an ego battle and like click it back. Or I think it's very important to identify what the exploits are they go for, where maybe they are too loose, where they are maybe out of line, and just play a very solid style against that actually. Let them make a mistake, let them put in chips with hands that they shouldn't be putting chips in. I think against them also what works really well is also widening your value range, or inducing I think works really well, especially against the ones that maybe play a bit too straightforward and just go after every spot where someone shows weakness. So inducing with good hands I think is really good against those type of players.
Yeah, inducing might work against some if you know what triggers them. You have to have some additional reads. And yeah, it can also be hard to get in leveling wars with them. So you have to be the one making the better reads on average. But these guys used to do it all the time as that's their playing style. So be cautious doing that.
But also, and that's the most important thing, is giving them rope. Checking to them in spots where you think that they just have too many bluffs and check strong hands. This is probably the way to make the most money against players that just bluff too much and put in too many chips with weak hands. Let's get to the fifth player, and that's kind of the very extreme end of that is the Maniac. That's for me the most extreme loose aggressive you can even be. It's a particular type for me because they're always out of line.
Yeah, against these guys, you basically have to get away or get it out of the way very often because you just cannot handle the pressure, and be prepared to call them down. But some are at least have a little bit of brain left, and then it's often not good to counter aggression with aggression, because they might stop their bluff, because they might assume, okay, he has something, I was very aggressive, I have to stop now. But if you don't show counter aggression, but just keep calling, they are more likely to continue. So yeah, bluff inducing is the main thing you want to do against these guys, or do something that might trigger them. So if they made their bet, click it back. So this could even make them more angry. But yeah, that's depending on the player and your reads.
Whenever they have the chance, they will take the opportunity. It can be emotionally difficult when they run well, then it just feels like they run over you. But
yeah, when they run well, they build huge stacks, because everyone is like, okay, you can't have it all the time. But if they have streaks where they run well, they build like enormous stacks. But yeah, usually they also be able to lose it back very quickly afterwards.
It's actually very easy to play against them, because when it's always happening, you know, okay, I have a good hand, I'm just going to check to him, or I bet small and induce a raise. And then it just becomes really easy to play against them. So against the Maniac, don't be scared or intimidated. If you know, oh, they're always open raising, they're always 3-betting, they're always putting in chips post-flop, you are going to win so much with your value hands. You're just going to reduce your raise folding range, you're going to reduce your 3-bet folding range, you're going to reduce your weak calling range post-flop. You're just going to win a lot of money with your value hands against this type of player. So a lot of people are...
Yeah, it's, as I said, it's quite obvious what the adjustments are against all these player types.
Intimidated against Maniacs. Don't be. Just play a solid style, go big for value, check to them, give them rope, and you go...
Yeah, also don't get involved with too many marginal hands, because the pressure will be too big to take it.
Going to win a lot of money against them. Now, the last player, that is category number 6. For me, orange, because it's my favorite color. And I think it's the most well-rounded type of player. I call it just top rec or end bosses. Only very few players get this tag from me, and it's generally people that I think are absolute top of the crop, really high-end competition that are really good at...
Yeah, true. I usually just put people in the category tag. But yeah, there are obviously good and bad tags, or often also called regular, so people who play a lot and often professional poker players. But yeah, actually, in reality, I'm not not interested in playing against any regs usually, because you don't make enough you can make money out of them, but not a ton. You are just looking for very good spots, and usually that's not in the reg games. And usually the reg games also don't run nowadays, so the game will just end usually when no fish is around. A completely different story, by the way, it is when you play heads up. Then you can play regulars. And there's quite a bit of money to be made, but yeah, nowadays almost everyone is just a bum hunter, so waiting for fish. So there are also not many sites where you can still play heads up. So yeah, that's a bit disappointing. And I'm not sure if it's still possible on iPoker, but then I was trying it. I joined like 20 players and everyone is just buttoning me and saying, yeah, no game. And also putting me at a huge disadvantage, because playing out of position one hand against everyone, they will have an edge even if I'm the better player. So yeah, usually heads up is dead nowadays. But yeah, even against good regulars, if you find the weak spots in the game, you can make money. And yeah, also back in the day, it used to be like the king of the hill principle. So there were only like four tables available, and then the regs had to battle, because if you have the ability to wait for the fish, you will make tons of money. But if you are a bad regular, other regs will join you, hoping that you give up the table. And yeah, that's also a game. But yeah, it's also not played anymore, basically, because yeah, most sites remove the heads up table. It's also because the sites make less money from these tables, especially on higher stakes, where the rake is comparably low to the amounts bet, and the better player crushes the worst player a lot. So yeah, the sites don't want you to get money out of the system. They want you to play and basically play in games where everyone is at the same skill level, and just everyone is losing the rake on a long-term basis. And that's why heads up was removed from most sites. At least that's my guess on it. And it was also like a very predatory environment, because yeah, most regs don't want to play under each other, just waiting for fish to join, and that's also obviously not healthy for the economy. And yeah, a bad player in heads up also loses way faster than in a 6-max game, I would say.
Adapting, that constantly evolve their game, and I think that's the core essence of it. They're also able to adapt their style to different styles and understand.
Yeah, in general, that's very important. You have to you never have to, you are not allowed to stop learning. You have to constantly evolve and learn new things and analyze your game. And if there is a situation where you are unsure about, always analyze it and learn and get better. And that's how you can still crush these days. And for this, there are also like a lot of links in the description, which you can use to get better at poker.
And like make exploits on the fly and have a really fundamentally sound game. People who play super high rollers, like one of the players I always think of is Timothy Adams. I have a few things that I try to do against him, but I think he's such a well-rounded player that I don't feel like it's really out of line, but it also doesn't feel like he's passive. Like it's a really interesting niche where he just plays very well, exploits really nicely too. There's a few players like this that I think are just top tier players. I think it's important to understand that, to know that you just can't do like very binary or simple things against them. You just have to yourself focus on playing well and not trying to deviate too much. And that's what I do against those, is I just try to play my best without trying to read too much into whatever he's doing. I observe, I try to learn, I try to understand.
Yeah, basically stick to GTO against a player like this, because it seems like they are also very well rounded and probably also do GTO decisions mainly against other good players. I mean, GTO means game theory optimal, by the way. I mean, in theory, this is the best strategy against someone who's well-rounded and also is well-balanced, because you cannot use another strategy that beats GTO. Yeah, I mean, it's unexploitable by definition.
But these type of players, and there's a lot of super high roller players that fall in this category. Against those, I just try to show up with my best game, and I would suggest you do the same. And really be aware that when you're on a table, that when they're there, just don't try to go out of line against them. Don't try to go into an ego battle. This is where a lot of players have lost a lot of money against me because they try to outplay me or win a big pot against me for I don't know what reason. Don't be that guy. And I think with those type of categories, I have worked with the system, and it's more granular with subcategories and mixtures of these type of players. But in my mind, that's really every player I sit down against, I try to get a good feeling for their character, how they think about poker, what level they're at, to then conclude how I best play and proceed against them. And then I build these characters of players, and then I go more granular into what exploits in particular lines I think are good against them, and where I think they will make mistakes, and what strategies I want to employ against them. So that's the system I use for categorizing players. I hope that's valuable to you, and there were some nuggets in there. If you want to learn more about stuff like this, go join us at Pokercode.
Yeah, that's definitely valuable information. I hope the wisdom of us both helped you guys. Yeah, let me know in the comments what system you use, because most of you are watching on YouTube. If you want to watch me live and also ask me questions live, Twitch is where you should go. And yeah, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share with someone who might also benefit. Yeah, that's it. And yeah, don't forget to check out my other channel, Finance with Excel it's called, where I talk about money, investing, cryptocurrency. And if this is a topic that also interests you, yeah, feel free to check it out. Good luck at the tables, and watch this video next. Yeah, if you are looking for more good poker content. Till next time, bye-bye.